Psychedelics Today. Thanks for tuning in again. Today on the show, Kyle and I talk to Lex Pelger of Psymposia, and we get into some really cool stuff. Lex just came out with a new book, and it is all about the endocannabinoid system in graphic novel form. He's pitching it as a whale of a book, big elephant in the brain kind of thing. A lot of great wordplay. We talk about one particular substance. It's an cannabinoid called anandamide. Fascinating molecule. We get into some medicinal marijuana stuff. There is plenty of chatter and banter that I think is pretty interesting. It was overall just a really fun conversation, and I think you guys are going to like it. He is going on tour. They're calling it the Blue Dot Tour, and it will go from New York to Boston, I think, all the way out to Oakland. They will be at the Psychedelic Science Conference, Psymposia, and Lex. And they will have a whole stage at the Psychedelic Science Conference. So that's really neat and good for them. I think they have 3 days of programming and an open mic. So I think there will be room for sharing stories when no one is on stage. So keep that in mind if you're going to be at Psychedelic Science 2017. If you want to support the show, share the show with some of your friends. Let them know you enjoy it, you find it interesting, and whatever other feedback you have. Otherwise, you can sign up for our email list on our website, psychedelicstoday.com. Email us or contact us. Contact form on the website. Or you can email us at psychedelicstodayemail@gmail.com. And we have actually launched a class again, the Psychedelic Self-Care and Integration class. People loved it. So feel free to reach out about that. I think that's pretty cool, very informative. People said it was a lot of material and well worth it. Also, I have a bunch of workshops coming up personally in Breckenridge, Colorado. You can find those at breath.com. The transpersonal breathwork dates are May 21, June 4, July 8, and August 6 of this year. So, reach out if you have any questions about it, or you can just sign right up. I think important to note, we're changing the name a little bit, or I'm changing it from Transpersonal Breathwork to Dream Shadow Transpersonal Breathwork, kind of bridging connections to my teachers, Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson in New York. So that's the story for now, and I really hope you guys enjoy this episode and reach out to us. Oh, and yeah, if you really have a lot of extra time or any extra time, jump onto iTunes and give us a review. I would really appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Welcome to Psychedelics Today with your hosts, Kyle and Joe. We are here with Lex Pelger from Psymposia. Welcome to the show, Lex. It's great to have you back on.
Good to see you guys.
So, yeah, you reached out and you wanted to talk about the upcoming Blue Dot Tour with Psymposia. And so why don't you give us a little background about that? What is it and what are you guys doing?
Well, we're taking our storytelling tour on the road. And it's actually thanks to MAPS and the big Psychedelic Science 2017 conference. They gave us the gift of a big stage to have out there in their free marketplace. And we're going to be featuring lots of different speakers there. And since we were already going to Oakland anyway, and I was going to have my book just done around that time, decided to do a storytelling tour out there and then take a good bit of time to come back. So I think we'll be on the road for about 2 months or so. And it's mostly just open mic storytelling about people's, usually their drug experiences of some kind, of different flavors of drugs, but really it should be called psychoactive storytelling for how you want to think of it, because as my partner Brian likes to say, there are so many things that are psychoactive, like giving birth or getting in a car accident or jumping out of an airplane, as well as taking lots of acid or heroin or ketamine or little bits of those drugs as well. And that's why I love these storytelling events so much, because we've been doing them all over the East Coast especially. And I'm a drug writer, so I've been collecting people's anecdotes about drug use for 10 years or so. And every one of these events, somebody says something new that I'd never heard before. I'd never even imagined. And the funny part is, so much of the time, it's like, of course, of course somebody did a drug this way and that happened. But I just didn't put it together. And it's really amazing to see. And the coolest part about the vibe is that because everybody's opening up about these things that are usually quite intimate and often not that funny, but deep and scary or life-changing, it really becomes a beautiful vibe that brings the community together. And the great part for us is the main thing to do is just put a naked microphone on stage, and then our community just brings the stories.
Yeah, you guys host really awesome events. I love it. It's always really intimate, and people can really just get on stage and share what they've been through. And I think that's really healing. And yeah, for anybody who hasn't been to a Psymposia storytelling event, you definitely should check it out. So what is the Blue Dot Tour?
The name came from the idea of going to blue dots in red states. Those little outposts of activism and art in places like that, like Viroqua, Wisconsin, which we just got to see the beautiful Driftless conference they pulled together out there.
Oh, yeah.
So just and that was the initial idea, is places like that. But the cool part is how many spots opened up. And so we'll go for, red cities and blue states and green cities and purple states and black cities and orange states, whatever we can find. We're looking for hosts still. We have the tour as planned out as far as Oakland and San Diego and LA. And then it looks like we'll be coming back through Portland and Seattle and Canada, then down through Chicago into Florida, and then back up to the Northeast. So we're still looking for hosts if anybody wants to reach out. If we can find a nice little intimate venue, we'll seeking stories, we'll travel.
And how do people reach out to you? At the Psymposia site? Or
on the Psymposia site, you can find information, or on my site, lexpelger.com. I have a blurb about what hosts might want to get involved and
awesome.
And what they might contribute.
And where are you guys starting off? Where's your first tour date?
We're having a launch in New York on April 1st, and it's at a beautiful art house in the Bowery, and it should be a lot of fun. And they're just pay what you will tickets. It is a fundraiser because I'm doing this in my grandfather's truck, and so technically any money raised, I think we're calling the emergency PAP truck repair fund, and we'll see how that goes. But then first date will be April 7th up in Boston. And then from there on out, it's a bunch of stops. Philadelphia, my parents' house in Lancaster, which if you're around Pennsylvania, come to my parents' house. It's such a good one. And then to Baltimore. And after that is we'll be in Athens, and then Austin, Texas, and then Boulder, Colorado, and then Oakland. And if anyone's going to be around Oakland for the MAPS conference, the free marketplace is going to be an awesome place to meet people as well. So I would just come and see that, even if you can't get into the conference.
Yeah, and for the folks that are going to be out in Oakland, what are you guys doing? You have the stage for 3 days, and you're just going to be hosting storytelling and also something with a podcast, right? Are you live streaming anything? I thought I saw something about a podcast thing out there. Yeah,
it looks like we'll have a couple of podcasts. Zach Leary will be doing his there. And the really fun one is going to be Duncan Trussell will be doing one with Android Jones from inside Android's microdose VR experience.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's going to be so cool. And Dr. Bruce Damer is going to give the intro about how about when it was Terrence McKenna's last psychoactive experience was inside a virtual reality machine. And so he got to do that with Dr. Bruce. And so Dr. Bruce is going to say what that was like for Terrence, and then we're going to see Android's newest level of virtual reality. So that's going to be a really fun thing for the evening time when other people are out on the cruise around the harbor. We'll be in the microdose VR.
Kyle, have you seen a demo of that microdose VR yet?
I don't think I have, but it
very
sounds really
impressive.
intense.
It's like live art painting with your full body.
Wow.
Like very intense and beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah, do you know if they're selling that yet, Lex? Is that like still in development?
I believe it's still in development.
That makes sense.
They do have a Kickstarter running. So if anybody wants to support the work of Android Jones, probably so many of you have enjoyed his experiences while high. So I think you should give perhaps half the price of a drug experience to Android for his work. Seems fair.
Yeah, it seems reasonable.
Yeah, and it's beautiful stuff. And I do think that this kind of virtual reality with people together, perhaps with psychoactives together, will be a new kind of experience that brings people together. And he's experimenting. He's on the cutting edge of that.
I really want to test out the VR stuff. Somebody, I believe, at the Montreal event that you guys hosted when I came up to do breathwork, it wasn't last year, it was 2 years ago for the 920. Somebody had the Oculus Rift there. I really wanted to try it. It seems so interesting, but I didn't get to. So
dude,
that's
for
really
$100,
cool.
it's incredible what they transform your telephone into. Like the little strap-on deal, and then your phone is just the most intense little VR thing. And then in a handful of years, man, it's the way it's going to develop is going to be insane. What it's going to impact is going to be absolutely incredible.
Yeah. So what? How's the format going to work over at the MAPS conference? Is it going to be kind of curated talks, or can anybody come up and share their story, how you've done it in the past, or?
For our stage, it's going to be some slots for open mic storytelling. And if I had my druthers, I'd make the whole damn thing open mic storytelling. But there are so many good people coming through, and a lot of voices that MAPS wanted to feature but weren't quite the right fit for their stage because they're trying to do something a bit more academic. And so we get all of those people, and it's really fascinating that way. What a mix of people we have from around the world and from around the different topics around drugs. And it's going to be really fascinating to see all the different voices. And everybody only has a half-hour slot, and we're running from 9 till whenever at night. So it's just all day, nonstop. Wow. New idea, new person. And as soon as someone's done talking, they can just move over to the tea house right next door, and they can talk to their fans and sign their books and answer the questions. And it's gonna be a great place for education. And 30 minutes is such a good time because, people can really do a TED style talk and get so much of their important points across.
Man, this is going to be a really tough conference to go to. I was looking at the schedule, and there's so much stuff I want to see. And now I didn't even know you guys had 3 full days of storytelling. It's like I might just want to hang out in the marketplace and listen to that. Do you have anybody like lined up? Like, what's your lineup looking like for out there?
Yeah, we have tons of people, which is really nice. And luckily, a lot of them aren't people that are really well known around the scene or around the world. Okay. They don't get the stage quite as much. And that's part of the reason that MAPS really wanted us there, is to make it more democratic with the voice. But it's also cool to have people like Jim Fadiman is going to be talking about microdosing. And he's a guy who can command giant stages, and usually you hear him at these big events. And to have him this much more intimate tete-a-tete, more talking with the audience, that's the kind of stuff we like to see happen.
So do you have any examples of other folks that Kyle and I might be aware of, but maybe somebody relatively new to the field might not know of?
Let's see. Sorry, I'm a little... With pulling them all together, it gets easy to forget who's all going to be there.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, I'm just going to pull it up right now. Look at the whole schedule.
Cool. Is the schedule online somewhere, or is it just something that you have typed up?
It is on the Psymposia website.
Okay, cool.
As well. And though it's not quite officially launched yet, we want to make sure that we check in with everybody, because they're coming in from all over the world, which is really part of the interesting about it, because MAPS has grants for people traveling there. And so we get updates from places like the Czech Republic and South America and things like that. And so the cool part is how all over the place the topics and the people are. For instance, Brendan Burns, he is with cluster busters and LSD, small amounts of LSD to stop cluster headaches, which is just a crazy type of medicine that you have to see to believe. And then people are good at holding space, like Mariana Dinkova, who is an ayahuasca expert, who's going to talk about how she guides trips. And yeah, it's really fun that way. And then you get people who are a little bit more academic, like Dr. David Lukoff, who's done all kinds of work, but he's going to talk about how he had a psychedelic-induced shamanic initiatory crisis. And he's normally the guy giving these long talks to academics and to deep thinkers. And here's him talking about the origin story for why he started doing this work. And I think that's often what is so appealing about the storytelling to people like that, or people like Rick Doblin, who have given these same speeches to the same crowds so often. They really appreciate the chance to say, but this is why I did it. And so instead of someone like that, you preaching to the choir a little bit about stuff they might already know or feel in their hearts. So often the choir, us, the activists, the young people who want to move this work forward, they want to know why their heroes got into this, and as well as knowing how they made a difference. And that's why storytelling can be so good for transmitting those tools between generations.
Have you ever heard David Lukoff's story before? He has a really interesting story. I went to a conference at Esalen. It was Revisioning Madness with Michael Cornwall and David Lukoff, and so I got to spend the weekend with them. And he shared part of the story, and it was really interesting. So I was looking on the MAPS schedule, and I was surprised I didn't see him on the lineup there. So it's cool that he'll be out there sharing.
Yeah. Those are the kind of stories that are just so much fun to get. Talks from people you might not know, and then stories from people you do.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So you guys plan to record probably a lot of it for your new... Well, that's actually kind of big news for this world, the podcast world. Psychedelic Salon is getting passed to Psymposia. So it's going from sunny San Diego to cold New York.
Yes. And actually, it's not quite past. I was a little bit too exuberant in my initial announcements about it. It's more that we're being allowed to contribute now to the Psychedelic Salon. And Lorenzo has allowed for us to start submitting talks and interviews and storytellings from things we've done before. And hopefully we'll move on. We're going to take more and more of the load off of him and start doing more. But it's still his baby, and as long as he wants to be his baby, it's great to see because he's so good at it. It does make me a little bit nervous. He has such big shoes to fill if I am going to be hosting something like this. Everybody, when I ask people why they like him so much, just to try to figure it out, everyone says that he is very believable, which is a cool thing to hear. It's maybe one of the toughest things to achieve in this kind of work and world, I think. He's
kind of like a friendly grandfather with a lot of experience. And you kind of naturally pick that up when you start listening. And if you're, susceptible to this type of media, he's kind of like the godfather of them. He used to have the nickname the Podfather.
Really?
I've been listening to him since like 2007 or 2006 or something crazy like that. And he was one of the very first people doing it. And, him and Bruce Damer kind of had that. I think Bruce Damer had the box of tapes, or somehow it got to Lorenzo and Bruce was involved. And then just went from there. Kind of opened up psychedelic podcasting quite a bit.
Yeah. The great work.
Yeah. So, okay, we're going to see you at Psychedelic Science, and it's going to be really neat. But the next thing we want to talk to you about is your book. So you've been working on this thing for a while. You even stopped reading other books for a little while.
Yeah.
So what's
that
going
was
on?
More of a. I've actually been working on this for 4 years now. This project, which is a little. Well, I don't know what that is. Hopefully my mother will be proud of me one of these decades. That's the plan. But I do finally have a book in place. I started writing a story about cannabis because I got some really great leads and interviews in the very beginning. A little bit of the hubris of it, though, was I said to myself, well, I'll just write a book about weed. How long could it take? Get it done in 6 months, and then I'll just, move on, write my next thing. And so that was 4 years ago, and I didn't know anything at the time. I thought I was some hotshot young drug science writer, and I didn't know about anandamide, which is now my great white whale. It is what, probably the rest of my life trying to figure out what that neurotransmitter in our brain is that's actually a cannabinoid. But it explained everything about why weed is such a great medicine, but also can be so mentally disorienting. or calming or antidepressant or psychotic causing or
Technical
whatever.
question. Has anybody been able to isolate anandamide yet?
Yes, it has. It is. They have its structure and all of that, but it took a long time. It was 1992 when we finally found this neurotransmitter in our brain that is the reason we have cannabinoid receptors in our brain that respond to THC. So we had to find the THC molecule in 1964 to give us the clue to start looking for the receptors it was hitting on, which gave us the clue that it was actually imitating a neurotransmitter we already had. And this neurotransmitter, it's not like, it's more widespread than serotonin or dopamine or things like that.
Oh.
So it's that big. So it's like we found this white whale in the depths of our brains. And not only is it there, there's billions of them. And we don't know where they do or where they swim or how they make love or where they come from. Even the synthesis pathways aren't all the way quite explained. But it does, because the receptors are so widespread, across the brain and across the body, it really helps explain how we can be such a different medicine, not only for every person, but even within every person. And not even because of the strains. You could smoke the same strain for years and still have it affect you different ways. I mean, sometimes, but it gives a clue.
So anandamide, for those who don't know, it comes from the Sanskrit word ananda, which means joy, bliss, or delight. So it's kind of a strange cultural coup inside neuroscience or neurochemistry to have named it that. It's such a cool thing.
Does it have some sort of relationship to chocolate? Doesn't chocolate bind with some of those receptors, or has some sort of?
Good. You two, I'm impressed. Yeah, Ananda.
I wrote a poem about chocolate and cannabis one time, and I remember highlighting that one, and that was like the blissful compound that gets you high.
Yeah,
in some sense.
So how do we smoke it?
What? There's no way. I don't know.
Do I got to freebase it?
It's really short, anandamide. THC sits in your system for like 2 hours. Anandamide's done in like 20 minutes, which is why it's more helpful in the brain, because it's more of a quick response kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And chocolate, I think, as far as we know, is the only place that it's found outside of any animal with a spinal column. In fact, this is the thing about our endogenous cannabinoid system, is that it's in all life that has even the hint of a spinal column. And so that means it evolved, before life even left the ocean. And started wandering around like this, there was this endogenous cannabinoid system that's some kind of homeostasis system for the body.
So that almost leaves a question. I don't know if this is like too down the rabbit hole or philosophical, but like, did the cannabis plant evolve because we have these receptors in our body, or like, how did that evolution happen? Like, have you come across anything like that in your research? Like, if we had these in our system, like, how did this plant start producing these compounds that just somehow started interacting with us?
It's a great question, and there's a lot of guesses as to the answer, but anyone guessing at this point is always saying, well, I know this is a guess. No scientist is sure on it. But one of the guesses is that it's some kind of convergent evolution, because it is helpful for plants to produce it because it keeps away predators. Or it could be that it produces it to help with UV damage, and it's some kind of repair molecule. And the reason, and it just happened that it was helpful in getting humans high. But we, in one sense, because it produced these cannabinoids, which weed, the cannabis plant, the hemp plant, won the genetic jackpot and is now spread across the entire world. Instead of being a tiny little shrub on a mountain in Central Asia, now weed is all across the planet. But the flip side is you pay a devil's bargain, because, if you look at how weed is grown in grow houses by meth heads in California, it looks like industrial farming with cows and chickens with oversized heads not able to walk around like you would see out there. And so it did spread, but it's been prostituted as well to make just one of those cannabinoids at a very, very high level.
THC.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Crowds out the ones that might be a little bit more helpful, like CBD.
So is there actually like a black market for extract, or a market for anandamide? Like, have you seen it out there?
No, I haven't. I think people are taking it and stuff like that, but just for the experimentation of it. But as far as cannabinoids go, it's not as enjoyable, I believe, as some of the synthetic cannabinoids.
Right. It's kind of like the concept of perhaps like with pharmawaska, you have to like consume a lot of these harmalines and then take the other thing. So maybe it could hyperpotentiate your trip, your marijuana experience.
That would be good. Smoke a fat joint, and at the 20-minute mark, when it's at its highest, down a glass of anandamide.
Yikes! Tell us how it goes, everybody. Feel free. I'd be curious. Yeah.
Actually, there's another fascinating fact down this rabbit hole that I think is really cool and it's helpful for people. I think it's a good bit of harm reduction. We only know 6 cannabinoids in the brain. There's probably a lot more, but one of the minor ones that we found is called oleamide.
You're talking about endogenous
cannabinoids inside our brain. And oleamide is somehow related to sleep. And so you can actually buy it on Amazon from that company Lift Mode, who sells supplements like that. And the way we found it is because they kept cats awake for 3 days straight, and then they tapped their spinal fluid and tested it, and that's where they found this molecule that appears to be doing something like crying out for the body to sleep. And so you can actually read Hamilton Morris on this. He says it's his favorite drug, which is saying something. Because if you take 2 spoonfuls, it helps you sleep. And if you take 4 or 6, it's a really nice, pleasantly warm kind of high. Apparently, I've never had that much success with it personally. But it's a drug already in your brain that you can buy on Amazon. Unlike a drug in your brain like DMT, which you will have to go to the Amazon for.
Right. And so, wait, you're saying that, what is it, oleamide?
Oleamide, yeah.
It's an endogenous chemical, so it's not in cannabis. It's just it's one of these cannabinoids that's produced in the body. Huh? Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's a fascinating discovery, and we're just starting to learn how to harness this stuff.
Yeah, I feel like it comes back to what Dennis McKenna always says. Like, we are drugs. Like, our whole experience is drugs. Like, we're just constantly like producing drugs in our body.
Yeah, he stole that from Dali though. Which is even more forward-thinking for him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He did credit him in Boulder the other day. I am drugs.
And sometimes the artists are ahead. Baudelaire said something about we all emit our own opium ceaselessly and ceaselessly. And we do. We have these endorphins that are just morphine, and we use it for connection and pain killing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your first book is finished, right? You have a series?
Yeah. Well, this is the first full book. I actually did a sample chapter that I'm really proud of, and it's about Reagan and AIDS and how that led to the birth of medical marijuana in California and the idea of medical marijuana in the country. And so it's really about, it's like 50 pages about the queer rights, and then maybe 10 pages about pot, which is a little odd for a pot book series, but Moby Dick's not that much about the whale, so I think it works. And so you can actually, if you sign up for my No Nonsense newsletter, you can get the PDF of that chapter. But that was the test, and then just this week I submitted the final printer's proof for my elephant folio, which is chapter 25 from Moby Dick, and we're calling it The Crown, and it's about the first 80 years of the chemical hunt for the cannabinoids. Starting from around 1860s, the chemists started trying to figure out what was the active ingredient in this plant, and the first one's structure and synthesis wasn't found until 1940 by Roger Adams, and it was actually CBN, which is the degradation product of THC, which is why old weed gets you more sleepy than newer weed, because CBN helps you sleep.
Nice. So it's like a pot, like a wine cellar, but for pot. Would be nice for somebody who loves sleeping.
Yeah. So and it's nice. It's a big full graphic novel, 140 pages, and it's using elephants and alchemy to explain this chemical hunt for the cannabinoids.
Awesome. And are you self-publishing, or you have a publisher that you're going to go through?
I am self-publishing right now, and we'll see how things go. I have a Patreon page where people can support me monthly, and I'll send them the books and updates and things like that if anybody wants to jump on board the fiery hunt. But if a publisher comes along who really loves this idea, great. But, it's a pot book based on Moby Dick, so it's always a little bit of an odd sell to people. You have to be just sort of kind of queer eye to like it. My father likes it though, so that's always what you're just looking for.
That's a start.
Yeah. That's the end. Hell.
So what else has been going on in Psymposia land? I think you guys have been growing at quite the pace lately. Anything major?
This is the major stuff for us. This tour and the podcast is taking a lot of the time that we have right now. And it's nice because we can just focus on these next couple months, and then come summertime, we'll see what happens. Right. Though the one thing, then this one's more my partners, Mike and Brian, who are the ones behind the magazine, but they're organizing a thing with Dennis McKenna's getting all of these great ethnobotanists and phytochemists and people like that at this castle in England in a couple months. And it's going to be a really beautiful presentation of some of the best people who founded these fields. And not that many people are actually going to go to the castle, but it'll be live streamed all over the world. And so they want Psymposia to help produce it and get the information out there. And it's going to be a really cool event. But but not all the stuff's out there yet about how about all the information, but it will be soon, and it's taking up, it's going to be a really cool thing. I think most of the rest of the energy is going towards the website and the store. Brian's just about to make a new, really sleek version because the magazine's really taking off. It's a spot where people can publish on all different kinds of topics and angles on this stuff. And if anybody out there wants to submit their story, we're always looking to hear people's stories, whether to an audio version we can put on the podcast, or if you want to write it down and have it in the magazine, if you have articles or ideas you want to share. If you reach out to hi@psymposia.com, it's a place where we want to feature a lot of different voices. And it's nice to see how many different ideas come out of things like that. Yeah, and actually, the other thing people can do is there is a campaign that a bunch of different organizations came together behind called the Psychedelics Because campaign. And so if you want to post about coming out of the psychedelic closet somewhere, the hashtag Psychedelics Because is a great way to do it. It is what people's stories are what changes hearts and minds. The science has been there for 50 years. The psychedelic renaissance and its peer-reviewed research is great, but to anyone who's experienced this, they're obviously reproving the wheel. And so it's more like somebody telling their parents or their grandparents, or somebody giving the Michael Pollan article from the New Yorker, because everybody believes Michael Pollan. He's so good. Yep. And the other article you can send to people who perhaps older relatives, aunties especially, in Oprah's magazine, her chief editor a couple of years ago took MDMA and had a beautiful write-up about how it helped her. And it wasn't over the top. It was just this was a helpful thing. I think it was because of the drug. I won't even say it definitely is, but it was so believable from someone coming from such a different angle on the thing. And it's a great one to share, I would say. Oprah's chief editor. I just think that's so cool. Once we get Oprah on board, we're really going to have this thing. I mean, if you know her, yeah, right. Like she's been offered everything. But yeah, I mean,
to me, man, she's the one that started the whole MDMA scare. Like,
oh yeah, I don't know.
Brain scans show. So at one point, she showed very misleading brain imaging on air, saying, "Look at all these holes in the brain. This is from ecstasy." It was like 2000. It's a funny story, actually. I was at college, like one of my first couple weeks at college, away from home. Just moved out. My mother calls me at like 11 at night, going, "Joe, are you using ecstasy? I've seen you drinking a lot of water lately."
That's the sign.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So that was an awkward, hilarious conversation, but it was all triggered by this like Oprah showing these images online, and probably right around August, September 2001.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And she never really came back to correct it because this is like a poly drug user with a lot of other issues going, like, you know, as bad as meth addiction can get, I think, kind of brain imaging. Don't quote me on that, but if you have the citation, please send it our way. We'd love to dig in.
And if I'm not sure which research she was citing, but the big one was the research that did show holes in the brain in human users, in mice, and they found out years later that the researcher had mislabeled the bottles and was giving methamphetamine at those kind of doses to the mice. And so, in one sense, it's hard to blame journalists for like, here's real proof, because it did look real. And then it took years later being like, oh, wow, this is actually some bullshit work. It's not even bad science. It's just you mislabeled the bottle? Come on.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say.
Damage.
Yeah. Like whose fault is it? The researcher or the journalist who gets the information? You know,
the journalist is kind of obligated to come out and say, oh, hey, these facts were wrong. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, once they find that out.
Yeah. That's the obligation, I think, of journalism. Like, you know, not spread misinformation when they know they have sent it.
Yeah. Wish that paid the bills. But since it doesn't, you won't see much of it.
Right. So, yeah, fascinating. So, what... I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry. I must have holes in my brain.
It's all that water you've been drinking.
Speaking of,
lay off the water. I just came across something with CBD water. New thing. Never heard of that
CBD
before.
coffee. Have you seen that?
CBD coffee?
I'm going to scoop some up in Denver next time I'm down there. Yeah. So like different levels of infusion. They're pretty expensive. It's like $40 plus pounds of coffee. So I might just buy one and try it out for a little while. I'm like doing a lot of surgical recovery right now, so I think it'll be helpful for me.
Yeah, it will. It's so good for bone repair, especially if there's anything proven about the cannabinoids. It's all 6 of the top ones promote bone growth, which is crazy. Normally, you don't even look at all the cannabinoids, but this time it's why. Somebody out your way was telling me that. For any woman over 50, it's absolutely one of the first vitamin type things you should be taking every day is CBD, because it's going to help with osteoporosis for sure. And all women have osteoporosis. It's only a matter of degrees of the bone loss that they're going to have. Right. And so even in spite of the neuroprotection and the pain stuff and all the ways that CBD is helpful, the bone growth alone is a good reason that I think everybody should come out of the closet and talk to their parents and grandparents about weed. It's really the reason I'm writing the whole book weed for grandmas. It's a line that always gets a laugh, but it's actually the most serious thing that I'm trying to say, because it really is maybe the finest drug we have overall for the processes of aging. And I know that sounds like a crazy statement, but that's why I make it. The science for that is there. For around 100 different diseases, we'd have peer-reviewed research that would back up what you hear from all the anecdotes of elderly users, let alone the 20,000 people who have gone through clinical peer-reviewed cannabis research in the United States. It's proven for all kinds of things. But again, the science doesn't matter nearly as much as the story of saying this might work. And the reason I say talk to your grandparents is they love talking about medicine. And that nice doctor, Sanjay Gupta, did say something. And so often I hear people say they mentioned it and their grandma said, I've been hearing about this. I would want to try it. And then you get to smoke a doobie with your grandmother or your grandfather and maybe really finally learn something. Yeah, maybe the best thing you ever do. And it can so easily completely turn their health around. I've seen it for so many different diseases in so many different ways that the amount of anecdotal evidence I've seen in 4 years of looking around is staggering.
If you have any examples off the top of your head, what are some? Curious to know.
Well, actually, the one that is the most standout off the top of my head is not an old person at all. It's a quite young person. I'll say there is someone I know, and she had 2 children, and both of them were on the autism spectrum. And the older one was quite far along. He was talking and things like that, but it didn't seem like he would ever be leaving the house or living on his own. There just was so little interaction as far as things go. His younger brother, there's more motion and rocking things going on, but it took me a long time, but I convinced her to start trying CBD because I'd heard that this could be helpful. And it completely changed their lives within 2 months.
Wow.
The oldest boy was I think 11 years old by that point, and probably only as verbal as a 5-year-old at best. Within 2 months, he was talking with his grandmother, having conversations. Now he's on the basketball team. He is a kid that you might think is slightly on the spectrum, but that's it.
That's amazing.
It was absolutely amazing. This kid is now going to have a full life. His mother was just going to be taking care of him forever, and she was okay with that. But that takes everything you have as a parent and as a human being, and all of a sudden he's going to have an even richer and fuller life. And the downsides are just so small. The toxicity from CBD alone is, if you're going to give your kid aspirin once in a while, CBD is not even close to that kind of level of toxicity.
So what was the application or like isolation? Was it like Rick Simpson oil
tincture.
Or? Okay.
It was drops. Yeah. So you can just drop it in a drink or under your tongue. That's why I often, for elderly people, young people, I usually say that tincture is the best way for treatment of chronic conditions because it lasts for a couple hours and it's a nice, easy way to get into your system. You can buy the CBD online and have it shipped to your house. So it's whole plant, or is it like kind of an isolate? It depends on where you're getting it from. Right. Usually it's more of an isolate, and it usually isn't that cheap, because the plant's been bred to have mostly THC, so there's very little CBD left. That's starting to change as CBD is becoming a sexier medicine, but it's still not going to bring the big bucks like THC does. And so it remains a fairly expensive medicine. I mean, expensive. You might pay $1 a day if you wanted to always be taking it. So it does make it the people's medicine for the number of things that it works for, the limited number of interactions it has with other drugs. Though I do have one piece of harm reduction that I never hear mentioned, and I think is really important. And it is that the one thing I've seen in the literature is that CBD tends to knock down the enzyme CYP450 in your liver. And the reason that one's really important is because it helps process a lot of other drugs. And if you don't have that working, then it can lead to toxic buildups of drugs in your system. And so the way the drugs that interact with that, if you're told you can't drink a bunch of grapefruit juice because of the medication you're on, that's the same kind of medication you're on that you should be careful using CBD with, because grapefruit juice shuts down your CYP450. And so you could it might be worth trying to take a little bit of CBD, but it is something to pay attention to, and you probably shouldn't be guzzling lots of it.
Right. So that's more of like...
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so that's more of like if you take a lot versus like a small doses over a long period of time.
I don't think anybody knows. And okay. I would err on the side of caution with this one, because I think you're allowed to drink a glass of grapefruit juice when you're taking some of those medications, but I don't even know that. And so perhaps a little bit of CBD is okay, but it is a risk that is worth considering, and it's one worth talking to your doctor about. Unfortunately, there's so many doctors that if you even mention CBD, let alone the cannabis plant, I've heard 30 or 40 old women say to me, I mentioned to my doctor and he said, if you ever mention that, I will never see you again. If you bring up that topic. And that's the thing. That's how doctors,
I think it threatens their licensure a bit, or their insurance or something, which is, a big problem in and of itself. But it's like, that's why there's special doctors here that in Colorado where you just go and that's their sole business, is saying, yes, you're eligible for medical marijuana. And that doesn't threaten them. it's kind of interesting that way. And every other doctor is just like, nope, I'm out. Like, don't talk to me.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, kind of sad.
And it's hard to blame them. You're right. It's a really tough medicine to use. And it's why it will probably always be hard to fit into the modern American medical model, because it takes a lot of nuance. You have to pay attention to yourself. You have all these different strains, but there's also half a dozen major ingestion routes. And sometimes the vape pen might work for you, but eating the edibles doesn't, or vice versa. You have to try all of these different intake systems until you find the thing that works for your medicine. And then you have to stick to that. But that's not what we want. We want, I want to be healthy, but I don't have to do anything about it. I just want that weed pill. Okay, I take my weed pill, I'm done. I'm cured. I don't have to think about it. But it takes paying attention to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask about that, like preferable method. I've been seeing a lot of people use like the vape pens for CBD oils now, and I just never know really how effective that is, or if it's just better to do tinctures.
I think it's more of a response thing. The reason that tinctures are so good is because they last for a couple hours, like I said. But for your acute ingestion, when you might be dealing with something like palsy, which cannabinoids are often helpful for, or you have a flare-up of pain, which is the number one reason people are using medical marijuana around the country, is pain. And so if you need a quick shot of cannabinoids, a vape pen is one of the fastest ways to do that. Even more so would be dabbing, because it's a very clean method. It's concentrated hash oil, so it has less of the other stuff in it, and it gets in your system right away. And so in a brave new world, the application of dabs of a little bit of THC and a ton of CBD for elderly cancer patients to help their pain medication work better is how these things are going to go. In fact, Israel is ahead of the curve, as they are on almost everything around pot. In fact, they have volcanoes. They have the high-end volcano vaporizers in the oncology wards of the hospital at Ein Kerem, outside Jerusalem, where Dr. Meshulam is. It makes so much sense. I mean, for pain relief and symptoms, smoking pot is a great thing. The thing that people are even more excited about is that large doses of cannabinoids like Rick Simpson oil can actually, it seems, cause cancer cells to kill themselves. And not it seems. It certainly does in lab dishes. You certainly have tons of great stories around the country about oncologists who have no interest in affirming weed's efficacy, see Rick Simpson oil change a tumor in a way that surprised the hell out of them. And yeah, people will say it's unproven. Yeah, it's unproven. People haven't really looked at it in the clinic as much. So that's the reason the data isn't there.
People have done it with Petri dishes in the lab, just a little bit.
Yeah, the chemical work is over 50 different cancer lines they've added cannabinoids to, and it causes apoptosis, the programmed cell suicide. And in fact, in Spain, Guzman's group is injecting nanoparticles of cannabinoids directly into tumors. And
have they released any results there yet?
Yeah, it does look like it's something that makes sense and is gonna work. I mean, this stuff is still hard to see it get, how this is gonna eventually get out to the oncology market, if it does. Just because the data is there that suggests we should move forward with clinical human use doesn't mean we're not going to wait 50 years to do it. I think the best example of medicine goes back 100 years to there's a doctor named Semmelweis, and he was talking about germ theory, and his findings that he did with an experiment in his hospital is he made doctors wash their hands before going from the autopsy room to the maternity ward, because before everyone was proud of how gunked up their drapes and their hands would be, and they would go directly from corpses to birthing women. And the number of women dying from childbirth fever was in, I think, the tens of thousands each year. He put out his findings, and they were completely ignored for 30, 40, 50 years.
He was very ostracized too. It damaged his reputation.
Yeah, doctors do not. I mean, You go all the way back to the Anatomy of Melancholy by Burton 400 years ago. Doctors are often the same kind of arrogant people who aren't going to change their minds from what they learned at their knee. And I have a lot of doctor friends that aren't like that, but you do see there's a reason that stereotype is true, and weed is especially threatening. And if I was a doctor, I don't have time to learn about every new crazy treatment and disease thing that comes across my desk. And why do I have to look up the weed thing? On the flip side, any doctor who says this isn't going to work or screw you for even asking, that means you've never even Googled it. You can't spend an hour looking at the data and not see that this is effective for something. And that kind of arrogance of refusing to look again, that's what's really galling.
As an oncologist, that's negligence, pretty much.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah, especially for symptom relief.
Hey, this is for sure. Slightly technical question. Rick Simpson oil, like, quite the concentrate, and people just get super high. Like, do you have any idea of like the breakdown, like at the full dose, like the full daily dose, like THC milligrams they might be consuming?
I wouldn't know the milligram counts. No, But what I do know is usually from the makers I know, the treatment course that they recommend, it is tough for people to deal with. It is something like 3 weeks of this super high concentrated oil that you either eat or you stick, or actually the cleaner way to do it is to take it rectally, because then it bypasses your liver. And because part of the reason that eating weed makes you so much higher is because your liver converts that delta 9 THC to delta 11 THC, which is 4 to 7 times stronger. And so it's one more reason it might be better to go the rectal administration route. But in any case, with that level of cannabinoids, and since it does seem like THC is needed to help this cancer kill itself with the CBD, it does mean 3 weeks of being usually unpleasantly high, especially when you're already worried about all of this stuff. But
right.
On the flip side, compared to the toxicity of chemotherapy, which is poisoning your body, it's not in the same ballpark. And one of the best stories of all about this comes from the origin story of Dr. Grinspoon, because he was one of the great scientists to break open that, yes, weed really is a medicine. It's not just a hippie drug that's not going to kill you. It's an incredible medicine. He had a son with leukemia. And so his son was from the chemo, he was so nauseous that one time he saw his nurse in the grocery store and he promptly started vomiting at the sight of her. And, it was just destroying this little kid. And so they'd been hearing about this, and one of them lets his kid smoke a little bit of pot right before they go in. And the nurses come out and they're like, what happened? He's eating a sub sandwich. Every other time he was retching and terrible, and now he is okay right after chemotherapy. And it's that kind of stuff that changes everything. This scientist went out looking for harm under orders of the federal government, and he found out there's no harm to be had here. And in fact, it's going to help my own child. And he's a scientist who made it believable.
One of Kyle and I's mutual friends had cancer, and to avoid nausea, the only thing he could do was to smoke in the hospital parking lot. It's pretty incredible. Like even edibles wouldn't work for him. It's like, holy moly, wow. You had to smoke. I think it had something to do with that like bolus dose of chemicals in the system, as opposed to like the longer trajectory of edibles. Maybe. Yeah. I think so. And it's just such a shame. All of these patients who it works for them, it's nice that now they have vape pens, which is a little bit more discreet. But I've heard from a number of VA doctors and nurses that at every one of their facilities and hospitals, there is the smoking spot where all the vets know they can go, and it's a don't ask, don't tell kind of operation. Military is good at. Yep.
But it's like, if this works for you, that's fine, because when you hear from all these different vets groups around the country about how this drug has changed things for so many of their people with PTSD, it is astonishing. You can see why these wounded warriors, like the Wounded Warriors Project, are so vocal about this, is because with all the veteran suicides that we're seeing now, 23 a day, probably more. This is such an amazing drug for that. And the thing that makes it hard is that for PTSD, it seems like for a lot of veterans, the only thing that's going to balance them out is huge amounts of cannabinoids. And you see vets, and they're dabbing lots and lots of this drug all the time. But at those kind of levels, they're not really getting that high anymore. I've heard so many guys be like, this is a reason that I can now take a nap and not wake up and fling my son off of me when he accidentally bumps me and I think it's an attack. Mm-hmm. And it just, instead of the current treatment, my godmother's a nurse with two kids in the service, and she said, these boys come home and we give them all of these drugs that make them gain weight and become impotent. How much harder is it to integrate back into this society that knows nothing of war, really, when you're also getting fat and can't get laid? It's
tough.
Why not try weed?
Double
first?
whammy.
Yeah. And weed helps those other medications work better. It's not only the opiates that it makes the pain killing better. It seems like you might need a little bit less Valium or the antipsychotics that they're just throwing down people's throats that have such obviously long-term negative brain consequences. The benzos specifically. Not that I'm going to say anybody shouldn't be taking Valium or Klonopins or Xanax. They can be really helpful for some people. But the amount that our society takes them, we are sowing seeds for a huge outlay of Parkinson's and things like that down the road.
Yeah, they're good for like emergency, but not, I've definitely, working in the mental health field and kind of having that alternative view and working with people with, say, like early episode psychosis, like we're like, oh no, like, some of the, like the facility I was working at, it was like, people can pass through their experience if we hold the space for it. And, sometimes people actually needed like a benzo or something to fall asleep just to get sleep because they've been up for like 36 hours. But yeah, the long term, the black box label, the side effects on there are they're scary. They're really scary.
Yeah. It can, and the one idea I've seen is that apparently it's quite helpful directly after a trauma. Like after something like 9/11, to take a benzo, it helps when you are saving that terrible memory that some of the edges are worn off and it isn't quite as traumatic later on down the road. Though that might be the same kind of mechanism that makes cannabis so good for PTSD as well, is because it helps people to forget. It's one of the top 5 things that it really does in the body is cause forgetfulness. And so that's a negative that people don't talk about as much, that if you smoke a joint before watching a movie, you will probably remember less of that movie, depending on your brain. Maybe you have a super memory brain that, nothing affects it.
Have you heard that joke about like becoming psychic after quitting weed? I think it was Terry from Reno 911, Nick Schwartzman. Yeah, he's like, I quit weed and I became psychic right away. I knew where my keys were all the time. Never lost my cell phone. It's classic.
Yeah. It is one more blessing and a curse. And I think that's what defines marijuana. The more I look at it, in every way, it's biphasic. A little bit can be really helpful for all kinds of things, but if you take lots of weed, it can really screw people up. You can get super high. If you take tons when you're a teenager, there are down term. Yeah. They're not as bad a long-term consequences as drinking at a lot at that young age. But
to be avoided, though.
It can be bad.
Yeah.
And we need to admit the harms so people will believe the goods. Because there is these pile of harms that are real, and that dabbing is going to exacerbate as there is more dabbing in the culture because dosage often makes a drug. And so tons of dabbing can lead to expansion of all those little harms we know about weed already. But that's why my whole book, I'm looking for every harm in the anecdotal data of people telling me stories of, oh my God, this happened, as well as everything from the mouse literature and things like that. Because if I want people to believe this giant pile of help for grandmas, I need to make them think that I'm somewhat reasonable by saying, here's every harm I can find from every single angle. I won't forget these, but let's be honest about how big these piles are.
Yeah. Where did you do most of your research? Like academic journals and stuff like that? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks to some friends with they gave me backdoor access to PubMed and those big applications. Nice. Though one piece of harm reduction is what's the name of it? Or open access. If anybody's looking for journal articles anymore, you can now get every single one. Psyhub.ce. scihub.ce. It is this beautiful hacker scientist out of the East, out of Russia, I believe, who is now moved and is in somewhere else. I don't quite remember the story, but they have now put open access to every single journal article that anyone's ever requested of them, and all of these trawls, everything already done. So for most stuff that you're looking for, they already have it there. And if they don't, they're going to use somebody's access to get it and then keep it there, as well as sending it to you. So
Sci-hub.org?
.cc.
CC.
Sci-hub.cc.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can donate to that as well. That is one that I think, because these articles, as a scientist by background in biochemistry, it's so sad to have all of these silos of data that nobody can access, that is being paid for by public money. It's one of the great scams of today. And it does make me long for the future in 50 years when this stuff is a little bit more worked out about. Right now, your worth as a scientist is in your publications. Right. But hopefully 50 years from now, it'll be how many Sci-Hub friends you have and how many people follow your work and how open they rate your everyday scientific journal as. And so you can stand there and say, I don't know this is true, but here's the evidence hot off the presses. And if you're the kind of person doing great work, everyone there will be like, I agree. But this is where you screwed up and this is where you should go. And it'll be a better system, I hope. But for now, I trawled through all of those access points and just tried to get the outlines of the whale. I mean, it really did take me, 3 years of pretty constant reading of the academic literature to even get the outlines of how big this endocannabinoid system is. That was only discovered in 1992. But with CB2 receptors on every organ in the body, and then CB1 receptors on all the higher parts of your brain, but none of the lower parts, which is why you can't overdose, it's amazing how pluripotent this molecule is. I think of it like an octopus with 1 million arms that can reach out to all these different parts of the body and just calm things down. The whole endocannabinoid system is something about homeostasis and bringing things back to balance. It's what happens in the body. There's even some researchers who have suggested it's really the system that finally marries the three fields that should never have been separated of neurology and hormones and the immune system. And that really it's a neurohormonal immunosystem, and it's the whole body talking together with that system. And the endocannabinoids are screwed up with those somehow. It seems to be a glue that holds them together. And in fact, one of the ideas that is more scientifically grounded and a fascinating one, Ethan Russo is a great one to read on this, is that the autoimmune disorders at their base might actually be endocannabinoid deficiencies. And that, because it works so well on things like arthritis and MS and these and Crohn's disease, where the body's attacking itself. And so because it seems to work so well, maybe by getting pot into your system, you're just giving your body the little bit more cannabinoids it needs to stop attacking itself. Because we still don't know why autoimmune disorders occur, really. And so maybe it is an endocannabinoid deficiency.
Yeah, really interesting. I remember reading an article not too long, well, maybe it was a few years ago, but they kind of made a little analogy, like smoking pot every once in a while is like getting a tune-up for your car. It's like your body kind of like needs to activate that endocannabinoid system every once in a while. Yeah,
it's so true. For some people, it can also, for a good third of the population, it's their worst drug.
Right.
Which is good to remember. People always apologize to me when they hear I'm writing a pot book, and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry. We just never worked for it. It always put me in a bad place. So I just never liked it." I'm like, "Great, you go do a drug you do like, or something you like. That's better." And it's easy for me to get stuck on the medical side just because I've seen so much help there. But the spiritual side is just as fascinating. Stephen Gray has his new book about cannabis spirituality. And then there's that old it's a beautiful book about using the plant ally. And I met a great old soul, and he has a cannabis church. And what happened to him is he hadn't smoked pot for like 20 years, and he used to run around with the Brotherhood of the Eternal Love and those cats. Whoa. And he felt bad that he hadn't smoked. He didn't feel like a good hippie. And so he finally smoked that half joint that he had found somewhere one Sunday morning. And he just looked around. It's like the room started glowing orange. It was beautiful. The entire room just lit up. And he finally realized it was the sun coming up. And he had the most beautiful experience after that with just his notepad. And so he said for the next 1,000 Sundays, that has been his practice, is 1 to 2 hits tops off the joint, never any other time, with just a notebook and by himself in whatever room he can get away in. And it's easy for us to forget that a little bit can often be a lot more. So smoke every night and to lose how special it can be. Not to say I'm not guilty, but it's nice to preach, to remember that, to take a break sometimes, to let those cannabinoid receptors lose their tolerance a little bit, to remember how special this could be, to have some practices around that keeps it from just being a salve. Because I think something I often hear is that people around their late 20s and mid 30s, we just stops working for them at that point in their life. Maybe things get busy, or maybe biochemically it just doesn't give you that fun and happiness that it used to. And it takes a while to realize that, because it's just weed. We say that all the time. It's just weed, but it can be. And so it's never going to kill you, but it can throw some sand in your gears every night, and you're not quite there like you should be. And it might take people a while to realize this isn't serving me anymore like it used to. And often people's path is they just eventually trail off from weed in their early 30s. And then around their 50s, they find it again, because now it really helps as a medicine. And the experience is fun as well.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I always had friends and whatnot say, "Oh, I'm over that phase," and I always thought, I don't know if I would ever get over that phase. And then I hit kind of late 20s, and it started acting totally different. Like I would always make jokes with my friends. I'm like, "Yo, you trying to get nervous tonight?" It gives me so much. It gives me so much anxiety sometimes. I can't deal with it. And it's like, yeah, it's not serving me, so I don't really engage with it that much anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the wisdom of paying attention like that and really knowing what works. And it's funny because that can annoy so many activists. I've had so many old stoners shake their fingers in my face, being like, "I've smoked it every day forever, and it's great for me, and it's always good." I'm like, great, I believe you. I believe what you're telling me is true. I don't think that's true for everybody. Yeah. And I know that some of you are lying to yourselves. I know.
Absolutely.
I have friends not too far from here, and she'll say his smoking pot has always made our marriage more difficult because he's not there all the time. And marrying a stoner for her has been one of the most trying parts of their relationship. He doesn't know that's happening. He's been told that's happening, but he has no knowledge that is happening.
Yeah, he's not hearing it. Yeah.
And it's, blind spots.
You've heard Graham Hancock talk about it, right? Like backing off quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's he lays it out in just that way. Habits aren't that great, and whatever else. Pay attention, be more aware of what's going on. Maybe just stop for a week, check in, see what's up. Yeah, it's always going to be there. So Lex, I wanted to jump into something and publicly coin the phrase together: dark web for harm reduction. So you have told people how to use the dark web. I'm kind of just learning a little bit about it, and I want to make it more publicly available. People should know how to use it. You shouldn't have to rely on, a-hole organized crime people around you. Why not trust a reputable seller that will ship safely and discreetly at a fair market price to your door? What can you tell us about it that you would like to share with some people?
I think the main thing that's important to share is we're living in the golden age of drug acquisition. It's now easier and safer to get better quality medicine, drugs, psychoactives than ever before in human history. And I think always people should stick to the dealers they know if they've been serving them a long time. If you have someone who's always been helpful and there for you, don't give up on them as it gets easier to get your weed or your MDMA or your other drugs. They put the time in, and they're going to get disenfranchised as this stuff goes legit, unfortunately. But there's so many people who have no access to drugs, especially as a generational thing, and they just don't know who to ask anymore. And the amazing part is the ease of doing this is pretty amazing. If you can technically competent to get onto eBay and pay for something using PayPal and linking your credit card to PayPal, that's all you need to know how to do to get onto the dark web. There are lots of places to get Bitcoins, and it's not hard to do anymore. And then to get onto the dark web, all someone has to do is download a Tor browser, which is simply an encrypted email browser. And then for all of the lists of the marketplace, check Reddit. Reddit has a great dark net thread going all the time who will tell you about the best markets going on right now. And they'll also talk about the sellers on these markets. And the thing that makes it so safe is on these markets, everybody is peer reviewed all the time. And so you can see a seller who has thousands and thousands of comments about what the quality of their product is like. And especially what happens when that something like 5% of packages coming from Europe don't get through, and how the seller responds to that. And I think part of the reason on the safety thing is why I say some packages don't show up is because occasionally that does happen. The amazing part is they're never breaking down the doors for that. No cop in the world is concerned about your personal use level of drugs getting shipped to your house. If you want to do this, use your regular address, get them shipped there. It is the safest way to do it because it is possible to have cops come and do a giant raid, but it takes a ton of SWAT teams. They have to physically, under the laws of this country, you have to see someone hand it over, and you need to have them sign for it. And so that means a big stakeout doing this. So that does happen, but that happens for kilograms of MDMA and for pounds of coke. It doesn't happen for pounds of weed even, or pounds of mushrooms. If you're getting enough drugs for yourself and a couple of friends, even if somebody finds it, no one is ever going to come after you. I mean, I've been asking for years, who do you know who's gotten busted and how? And I've yet to see anywhere in this country where regular amounts for the mail have mattered. I know it freaks people out. I think and almost every other way of getting drugs is more risky than having them shipped to you by someone whose professional job is hiding drugs in an envelope so nobody finds it. Especially in the United States, you can get any drug shipped from in the United States, which makes it even safer. Though, if you want good MDMA, it's in Europe. You know, my fatherland of the Netherlands, they have a much more. There are factories there apparently that operate at night making this stuff, and the Dutch government, in their wisdom, has a blind eye, just like they have a blind eye to how the weed is entering the smoke shops that are legal. Their old backdoor hypothesis over there, which I have a great name for.
What's the subreddit? Dark net?
I think dark net markets, I believe. There are a bunch of easy how-tos out there about how to do it. Mm-hmm. So the one there's one on Alternet called Why It's a Lot Less Risky These Days to Get Your Hands on Interesting Drugs If You Know Where to Look. And it's a bit of a walkthrough on how to do this stuff. Mm. And
lovely article title.
Yeah. The thing is that as we start to realize what amazing medicines a lot of these are. You know, psychedelics work for so many mental health disorders at small doses, but ketamine for depression, dissociatives for all kinds of different diseases, and various different branches, and even just cheap pharmaceutical medications. If you're paying out the wazoo, there are a bunch of Indian pharmacies that are really excellent operators to just have the drugs you want and send them to you. Mm. And it's a way to get your medications cheaper. And the quality can be really good. The thing to watch for is just to try to read between the lines of the seller's description of themselves, because I think it's really easy to find someone like that friendly dealer who really loves these drugs, and they'll tell you about each of them, what they do in the brain. Here's the harm reduction around it. You can find sellers like that and just keep getting your medicine from them. And I think it's a great way to support the people in the community who are actually taking the risks. You, in receiving these drugs, are taking really no risk. The people who are getting them for you are the ones who deserve some thank yous for the jail time that they risk for these very potent medicines.
Yeah. On the flip side, do you see any negative consequences of this? I remember reading a step-by-step, and somebody was saying that even like downloading Tor can put you on some sort of list. Like I think about this stuff now that like internet, like security, I mean, you're always at risk. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
It certainly is a possibility down the road for this kind of use to be risky if they're looking at broad strokes of things. But on how the war on drugs has operated so far, and probably how it will continue to operate, is whatever's easy or whatever's very sexy. And in this country, it's always been people of color on the street, or the long hairs who are associated with the wrong side. And it's so much easier to get people there. And always the safest place for the dealing and consumption of drugs is in the middle class. That's where you can simply get away with it, because, who's going to go after white people with lawyers for personal use level of drugs?
Right.
And so how much are going to track people on this that are politically not sexy to track? I don't think that's going to change as much. On the flip side, for the giant operations and pounds on the table by big time dealers, that won't go away. But I don't know, and I don't know that world, of course. But I'm sure that has changed completely. I know that there are markets out there that are private where millions of dollars change hands for giant shipments. And all of a sudden, it's much easier for these entities communicate with each other securely, because there is the Tor marketplace, which was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense as a way for dissidents around the world to talk to each other. And of course, they also enabled the safest way to get illegal drugs ever created, which is ironic. And so that risk could be down the road for doing this stuff. But to be honest, as someone who has studied the history of the war on drugs, it doesn't seem like how it's ever going to be worth their time with the way they like to operate.
Right. Yeah, I just think about like data mining and like, the internet profile that we are all making going on, using Facebook and this and that. So, even like just searching like a drug Reddit or something like that, like, where's your information going? I know if you're on Tor, it's a little bit different. You're like going through crazy proxies and but if it's somebody that's just interested in this stuff, searching it, like, is there a profile? For somebody who would just go down the corner and go to their friend's house, okay, maybe there's no traceable stuff. But now, like, since we're all hooked in and like voluntarily sharing information, like, I think that's where like I get my mind get caught up at, where it's like we're voluntarily just putting everything out there. And I don't know, it's interesting to think about the future of that.
Yeah, it's true. It is amazing how much of us can be found online. I think that's why it's reasonable to feel somewhat safe right now for taking normal precautions like using the dark web, like tumbling your Bitcoins through a laundry system, because what they're really looking for always is a low-hanging fruit. And so if they're going to go for the online hanging fruit, there's so much of it. There's so many people who sell weed on Facebook. I don't even know them. And they friend me because they have a bunch of weed people and they are offering me weed online. And then there's long Instagram and Twitter things of people's opiate use. And so it's just constant streams of them shooting up heroin all the time. And so the beautiful thing about the internet is everyone's sharing it. Of any drug you've ever heard of, there's someone bragging about it loudly online, and the cops just don't seem to care yet.
I'm blown away by some of the stuff I see on Instagram and whatnot. I'm just like, wow, who has the balls to post this stuff?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Don't be the low-hanging fruit. Probably the same thing you do at festivals. If you're going to buy and do your drugs there, then do it somewhat discreetly. Don't do it where it's going to be obvious to an undercover. And I think your online profile could be about the same. Be reasonable, but, live.
Amen.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we probably are at about time for recording. So, Lex, people can find you at your website, lexpelger.com. Psymposia.
Correct.
Come check him out in Oakland at Psychedelic Science 2017. Are they sold out yet?
Not quite, but they almost are.
So get in there. Kyle and I will be there. Give us some high fives. It's going to be cool.
And look up the Blue Dot Tour. Hopefully we can get to your neck of the woods. Come check it out. Share a story.
The return journey still has openings.
Amen.
Dude, Oklahoma City could be cool as hell. I wish I knew people there. That whole like Flaming Lips art house they have, I think it's called the Womb. It's like, that's one of my dream vacations.
I think they just closed down.
No.
According to Kat, who is my roommate and best friend who's going out with me. We did want to stop there, in fact. It's funny you should mention it. Apparently they're buddies with Miley Cyrus. And apparently if you're writing a weed book, you need to get Miley Cyrus. So, if anybody has it, I'll be glad to send you a free book if you can get an extra free book to Miley or any other famous stoner.
There's this album they put out just like 3-4 years ago that contained the blood of all the people recorded on it. So it's like a special edition. So Miley Cyrus is in there, all the guys from the band, like all these guest artists. So it's like clear vinyl, but everybody's blood. It's fascinating.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Quite the thing. All right. Well, Lex, anything else you want to throw out?
Just thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys.
Yeah, I love talking to you too, man.
Likewise.
I can't wait to meet you in person in Oakland.
All right. Looking forward to it.